welcome.
Hey, Walter, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, you're live.
All right, we are live. So welcome, everybody. I'm Walter Alcorn, Chair of the NVTC WMATA Committee. Welcome to our February 29th NVTC WMATA Committee meeting. And I'd like to note we are starting the meeting at 6:02 p.m., not too bad. Tonight's meeting is an all-virtual public meeting as permitted under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and under NVTC's electronic participation policy. The meeting is being streamed live via NVTC's YouTube account. NVTC staff they have followed the procedures and guidelines to give notice to WMATA committee members, commissioners, staff, and the public about this meeting. For the public, if the live stream transmission fails, please contact NVTC staff via email. That email address is support@novatransit.org, which will be monitored during the meeting. This information can also be found on NVTC's meeting webpage if you missed the email address. I'll now ask Alan to call the roll to identify commissioners and staff present so far on the call.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Please respond here when you hear your name. Chair Alcorn.
Here.
Mr. Gary. Mr. DeFranti.
Here.
Mr. Letourneau.
Here.
Mr. Smedberg.
Present.
Mr. Snyder.
Here.
We have a quorum, and we'd also like to welcome Mr. Walkinshaw as well. As not a member of the committee, but thank you for joining us tonight. For the members of the public, I'm going to go through a name of folks that here from MVTC that are joining us on this call. So we have Executive Director Kate Mattice, Director of Finance Administration Scott Kolkorf, myself, Alan Fye, our MVTC WMATA Senior Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Senior Program Analyst Andrew Hager, MVTC and IT Resource Manager Melissa Walker. That's a long title, but the most important title, and our Legislative Administrative Assistant Tenley O'Hare. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan. We do have several things on the agenda. We're scheduled to go as long as to 8 o'clock. Let's see if maybe we can work through things and be done before then. But the first thing should be very brief. It is review of the October 21st, 2023 NVTC WMATA Committee meeting summary. Does any committee members have changes to that summary, which is now a good 4 or 5 months ago? Any changes? All right. No changes to there. So let's move on to item number 3, and that's the NVTC WMATA Committee overview and 2024 work plan. So it has been a while since the committee's met. This is our first meeting of the year, and this is generally when committee members receive an orientation on the WMATA Committee and its role within NVTC. This year, there are no new commissioners joining the WMATA Committee. So staff has prepared a very brief refresher to reacquaint us all and provide an overview of activities during the coming year. So I think, as you all know, this committee works collaboratively to make sure that Virginia speaks with one voice on WMATA-related matters, and the proposed work plan and schedule for 2024 maintains this focus and also momentum. So the committee's schedule may change if the committee needs to respond to any initiatives at WMATA, across the region, the General Assembly, and we've certainly seen that over the past year. So I'd like, Adam, if you could go ahead and present the slides, and then we'll see if there are any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, a couple slides here with a quick overview of the committee and how it relates to the commission. The committee was created by NVTC in response to the 2018 dedicated capital legislation in Virginia, and the committee's role is established in NVTC's bylaws, which outline its 2 primary responsibilities, which are providing consensus-based recommendations to the commission on policy matters related to WMATA, and providing guidance to staff on ongoing WMATA issues and NVT's responsibilities under state code, namely the annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA. And if we could advance maybe to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I was going to say, we need to get to this slide. Okay, go ahead.
And just one more, actually. There we go. The commission provides monthly reports from the Virginia members of the WMATA board and the MVTC WMATA committee chair. The commission may from time to time take action on additional WMATA items upon recommendation from the committee as well. We also coordinate calls with jurisdictional staff and WMATA board members to prepare all parties for the WMATA board meetings and to facilitate information sharing between board members and staff. These calls also help build Virginia consensus on key issues and facilitate multi-jurisdictional representation from MVTC's members of the WMATA board. The next slide outlines the proposed committee schedule for 2024. So tonight we'll cover the WMATA FY25 budget and provide an update on our operating funding and reform working group, along with some related efforts in the General Assembly. We'll host a work session on our annual report in the late spring or early summer before reviewing and recommending submission of the report for consideration by the Commission later in the fall. At the right time, we'll continue engagement on the General Assembly's joint subcommittee studying long-term funding for WMATA, and we'll have more information on this item later in tonight's meeting. As you can see on the right side, we'll also provide a briefing on WMATA's Better Bus Network redesign once more information is available on that effort later this year. I'll note too that it is likely that the WMATA committee will meet jointly with MVTC's Legislative Policy Committee in 2024, given some of the topics at hand that you can see here on the screen. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will pass it back for any initial questions here on the committee and its schedule for 2024.
Thank you very much, Adam. Does anyone have any questions on this? And we're probably small enough you could just unmute and talk, or if you want to raise your hand, that's fine too, virtually. Any questions, comments? Okay, I think this is all pretty straightforward, and I would just encourage everybody to stay in contact with staff on this. I know there's great communication across a lot of folks on the commission and also this committee and staff, because we are trying to be flexible. We're going into some very active waters, if you will, during the coming months. And so the schedule may need to be flexible a little bit. Okay, Adam, anything else on this agenda item?
I don't think so. We can keep pressing on.
All right, so let's then move on. We are now on item number 4, discussion and comments on WMATA's proposed FY 2025 operating budget and FY 2025 through 2030 CIP. So next on the agenda, the committee will discuss comments on the WMATA General Manager CEO's proposed FY 2025 operating and capital budget, and take one action to authorize the committee chair, which would be me, to submit the comment letter to WMATA. So since WMATA's public comment period closes before the next commission meeting, the WMATA committee's feedback this evening will serve as MVTC's official comments. To facilitate the discussion, the WMATA team at MVTC has put together a brief presentation that includes topics to include in the letter. The topics for the letter were shared with the committee and the public last week, so we have something from which to work. And I would like to thank everybody. Hopefully everybody got a chance to see that. Thank you, Commissioner Walkinshaw, for being here. Certainly would look forward to any input you might have as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to you, to Adam, for another presentation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next 4 slides here cover the FY25 proposed budget, and then we'll talk about some key themes for a comment letter from the committee, which will need to be submitted to WMATA by its March 5th deadline. So first here, the doomsday budget back from December. So this is again for some context. WMATA is technically asking for input on its original proposed budget. This was released in December and includes significant system-wide service cuts and fare increases. This would have been a worst case scenario for the region, with 67 Metro bus lines eliminated, 10 Metro rail stations closed, and major reductions in service across the board. But this is thankfully pretty unlikely at this point. Next slide. A revised FY25 proposed budget was released earlier this month and assumes 2 key items. First is a 3% cap rebaselining in Virginia and Maryland, and second is additional funding from all 3 compact jurisdictions. This operating budget would keep FY25 gross expenses even with FY24 levels and would total just under $2.5 billion. This revised budget relies on $104 million in additional preventive maintenance transfers, but includes over $100 million in cost savings in FY25. Next slide. As far as service and fares, WMATA has outlined targeted rail service cuts, which would align peak service with ridership levels, the operation of more 6-car trains, and reduce service on holidays that traditionally have low ridership. FY24 Metro bus service levels will be maintained as WMATA gets closer to its Better Bus Network redesign. Fares would be increased by 12.5%, with up to 25% increases on late nights and weekends. Parking would remain unchanged under this scenario. In the original proposed budget for reference, fares and parking would have been increased by about 20%. Next slide. Again, this revised FY25 proposed budget assumes additional funding from Virginia, Maryland, and the district totaling $480 million. It's important to note at this point that these additional levels of investment from the 3 jurisdictions are not consistent with WMATA's subsidy formula and will need to be reconciled during the budget process. Our budget comments that we'll cover here in just a moment reflect that we do not want to see any formula changes during the budget process. So on the next slide, we start to move into the key themes that we propose to cover in a budget letter. So hopefully everybody has seen this. I'll note up front that given the timing of the WMATA budget process and the General Assembly session, we have more than one audience this year, so keep that in mind as we go through some of these items. We do, of course, want to reinforce that funding WMATA is a joint partnership between localities and the state, as well as a value of WMATA to the Commonwealth. We also want to remain focused on a long-term solution and not just a stopgap funding effort for FY25. And the letter will acknowledge the original proposed budget and the General Assembly's efforts to rebaseline the 3% cap and seek additional state aid as those efforts are ongoing in Richmond. There's a few items we'd like to highlight with the revised FY25 budget, namely the targeted service reductions, fare optimization, enforcement, and support for MetroLift. And of course, WMATA has identified over $113 million in cost savings, which add to over $308 million in cost savings between FY18 and FY24. On the next slide, a few additional comments. We do want to avoid overburdening long-distance riders and long-term use of PM Flex to close budget gaps. And lastly here, 2 items related to formula. As mentioned earlier, we do not support formula changes during the budget process. So we will want to see the additional funding commitments reconciled with the approved subsidy allocation formula as the budget process evolves. And as we get closer to the Better Bus Network redesign, we want to see updates to the Metrobus subsidy allocation formula as part of that effort. And then finally here on this last slide, some next steps as far as the budget goes. Comments, of course, are due to WMATA on March 5th, and budget adoption by the WMATA board is scheduled for April. As the budget is closely tied to General Assembly activity, we included 2 key upcoming dates as well. March 9th is when the session ends, and April 17th is when a reconvened session is scheduled to begin. So with that, if we could advance to the next slide, and I will pass it back to Chair Alcorn.
Adam, thank you very much. You're doing a great job getting us out of here before 8 o'clock. Thank you. An excellent summary. I guess before I open it up to any committee members, I do want to thank in particular Matt and Paul for all the work you've done on the WMATA board. This has been I know a particularly challenging, some might even say a little bit of a moving target budget, but it is out now. It is certainly under discussion, a lot of quarters. Paul or Matt, did you want to start us off in terms of adding anything more to what Adam presented?
Matt, you want to go ahead and start, and I'll.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Supervisor Alcorn. So I think at this point, what we've done is basically try to level set based on where the discussions have gone in Virginia, Maryland, and DC in terms of additional funding. And we are very fortunate to have productive discussions in all 3 jurisdictions about providing us some funding. So the general manager's revised plan is reflective of sort of what each jurisdiction has committed to publicly, or at least what the discussion has been. All of those are going to be subject to final appropriation in the budget process that's occurring in those jurisdictions. But it really, will allow us to defer, hopefully, and permanently the worst impacts of the proposed budget that we're technically commenting on as part of this. I think one theme that the board has had consistently is that we do think that Metro riders do have a role to play in bridging the gap, and that's why even with the general manager's proposal, revised proposal, there is still a fare increase that is included in that of about 12.5%. We have not had a fare increase at Metro in a number of years. And certainly inflationary costs and other costs, toll costs, all sorts of other things have gone up. Metro hasn't. I think we were at a point previously where, service had been impacted by the 7K issue in COVID. We're not at that point anymore. We're running what I think is a very good service with very high levels of customer satisfaction. So I think it's a better time to be asking for our riders to pay some portion of that. And that's a theme that we've heard from the governor and others as well, in terms of wanting to see that. The team at Metro, I think, has done a good job finding efficiencies. All told, there's over $100 million of internal cost reductions that are reflected in the revised proposal. It is important to note that, while we'll have savings ongoing, we're probably not going to be able to come up with that level of savings every year. So, we can't expect that to continue. Some of these things are things that you do once, you see a savings. But next year we won't be in this position of being able to cut this much without impacting service. But I think the team's done a very good job on that. And, we're moving towards a pretty good solution here. The comments certainly seem to be on track with what Paul and I have been advocating for with our colleagues.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. Paul, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I want to recognize Matt and his committee for the work that they have done. And Matt has really done a great job leading that finance committee. Just big picture, in addition to what Matt said, aligning, this revised budget, if you will, along the way here does really reflect what, we've heard from the jurisdictions. I think generally speaking, we're feeling better than we were a few months ago, coming where we are right now. Specific to the Commonwealth, we have met with the governor personally 3 times now for about an hour and a half each meeting. And with the Secretary of Transportation, the Deputy Secretary, and Director DeBrule. Those have been, and the Chief of Staff, those have been very good discussions. We've also met with several state senators and state representatives, the leadership. Want to particularly point out Jennifer Boysko, Mark Sickles have been extremely helpful, Adam Evan, and a few others in helping us, get to this point. We did have an opportunity. Randy Clark and I, the GM, had an opportunity to meet with Louise Lucas, the last meeting that we had with the governor right after that, which went, pretty well. I think, again, we kept it pretty top line, but, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how one wants to look at it, WMATA is a pawn in this complex political game that's going on right now, or political chess that's going on right now in Richmond. So, but I think we're feeling pretty good. I think, the GM and the team, our CFO, and Tom Webster, his shop, they've really done a great job, educating folks about what the numbers mean and how we got there, and being able to substantiate all that they've done over this last year to get us to this point. So, and then of course, Kate and the team here and so many others have also been extremely helpful. So, given where we are right now, it does seem like we are in a fairly decent place. We're still getting a few requests for information and clarification. And Matt, thank you for forwarding that last one. 402. It'll probably be up to the last minute, but again, I think we're feeling pretty good. Maryland is a little further along than we are right now. I think they're pretty much locked in. They are further along than we are. In the district, while it hasn't formally started their process yet, there is a lot of consensus from the chairman of the Transportation Committee, Mr. Allen, the mayor, and other key officials there that, they're committed to that, 200 million. So hopefully everyone will be able to come through. I think one thing I did want people to know, and it was interesting, and particularly with Senator Lucas and a few others, they immediately, understand, okay, we got to get past this 2-year crisis, but yet we need to fix this. We need that long-term solution. They immediately went there. After Randy and Yatunde did the top line, they immediately went to, okay, well, what about the long-term fix? We can't keep doing this. This is not good for you. It's not good for us. It's not good, in our case, not good for the local jurisdictions. So they immediately went there, and there's been a lot of, despite all that's happened to get us to this point, it a positive thing now. I think everyone is in general, consensus that we really do need to tackle this once and for all, and get to a long-term solution on this, whatever it may be. So leaving that open for right now, but definitely a lot of consensus. And I have to say, I got to give the governor credit. I mean, he's read the materials. He asked good questions, and he came prepared. He wasn't really working off notes. I mean, he came prepared and was actually really quite engaged. So I was actually pretty impressed by that, actually. So.
Well, fantastic. Paul, thank you so much. That's very positive. I think very hopeful, both for the short term and the longer term. And I think we need to have hope on both fronts. So thank you. Thank you very much for all your work, Matt, for all your work as well. I know it's taken a lot to get to where we are right now. We still have a ways to go to finish off some of these things. I have just one timing question. And Paul, you said something about coming down to the last minute. What are the last minutes? And I'm thinking now not just about the however much funding ends up coming from the state for WMATA, but in Virginia, sometimes other things hold things up, and the budget gets negotiated far along. And maybe this is for you or Matt or Kate, but what are some of the timing issues are there timing issues you're concerned about, or how are we looking if things do drag out in Richmond longer than any of us would hope?
Yeah, well, actually, Walter, let me start outside of
Please.
Richmond, because there's a couple of factors here. One of the factors is that the amount of money that has been included in the House budget for Metro, if you look at Metro's funding formula, and then you look at the commitments that have been publicly identified in Maryland and DC, those numbers don't match. So Virginia is actually higher proportionally in the formula than the other two are. The timing challenge, I think Maryland will finish probably first, and certainly in the spring with Virginia. The district's process is much later because they have a different fiscal year. Their fiscal year runs 3 months behind ours. So they'll just kind of be getting into their process when we get to our budget adoption. And that's going to pose some challenges for us because we have to reconcile these three numbers. I know there's positive conversations going on with the district, and we're helping them to understand when you remove the 3% cap, which all three jurisdictions are now assuming in the discussions they're having, it changes the allocation, and the district's allocation goes up by a greater amount than everybody else's does. And that's because in the formula, particularly ridership, which is an element of the formula, the share of riders on the system in the last survey jumped from 33 to 42%. So their contribution is going up quite a bit at the same time that the district itself is having some financial challenges. And so that's certainly created some concern on their side between what the numbers that the CFO are putting out, the administration, and the council. So we're working through that, helping them to understand the formula and why it ended up that way. I mean, from our point of view, it actually shows that we were paying a higher share over the last couple of years, probably, than what we probably should have been. But I understand from their perspective, when your bill goes up a lot, all of us naturally are saying, well, what happened? So we're going through that process. That timing challenge is certainly one that we're going to have to work through and come up with a strategy for how to handle, which could at some point include a subsequent budget adjustment to reconcile these numbers once we know exactly where everybody is. There's also some other outstanding issues there that we can look at. I'll defer to Paul on the Richmond timing issue, since I know he's certainly engaged in some of the other discussions happening there on some other topics.
Yeah, and Walter, I think we're just simply caught up with other issues. You've seen a lot of press just in the last couple of days about the toll issue, which is very close to Senator Lucas's high on her agenda. We also have the challenge of a lot of need in the education and Medicaid issue areas, which everyone's trying to balance. The arena issue. So the timing of things, they'll have something. I don't think anyone's expecting that when they, hit the gavel in another week and a half or so, that this is going to be done. It could stretch out for us for a while too, with all these things, playing out. And again, someone said down there recently that, we're sort of, a bit of a pawn in a sense, in this complex political game, chess game. So, hopefully not too much of a mover or importance here, but there is.
To that point, I think we've done a pretty good job separating
everything,
the Metro discussion from the rest of the kind of arena negotiation that's taken place. I think there's a widespread understanding in the legislature that these issues should be handled separately, and I think the governor, following a meeting with us, came out and said that publicly, even as far as he's concerned. So,
yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I want to open it up to anyone else with questions. Any other committee members or Commissioner Walkinshaw? Paul, do you want to say something else?
Yeah. Just one other quick thing.
Sure.
The economic study that NBTC did has really been very helpful as well. I think people just, when they see those numbers and they understand what's behind it and the importance of not only Metro, but just this region to the Commonwealth and what we contribute, has really, I think, struck a lot of people. And you can see them, their eyes just, open wide. I don't think some of our more local folks may not even understand the true impact of it all.
Yeah, showing somebody, self-interest can be a powerful motivator. Just put it that way. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Paul. Matt, any questions? And I would just ask either, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a basic question. I think I'm reading the revised FY25 budget presentation. I've only looked at the presentation correctly, but it doesn't include any of the bus route cuts that were in the original doomsday budget, because obviously all of us now are dealing with people reading about those cuts that were in the original budget, but none of them are in the revised budget, or are there still some cuts to bus service in the revised budget?
There are no changes to bus service.
It's just continue with the Better Bus Network redesign.
So what I was going to say was bus will be as is, but we are going to be looking at a mid-year enhance or change that will be revenue neutral, that will implement elements of the Better Bus Network that can be implemented without additional cost.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, hi, Dave Snyder.
Please, Mr. Snyder.
So want to go back to the prior slide because I want to understand there's a phrase there under the introduced February 8, 2024 budget comments, targeted service and fare optimization. What do we really mean by that? And so it's first a question and then a comment.
Great question. Targeted service and fare optimization. Andrew, you want to jump in on that one? I know at fare enforcement.
Yeah, it essentially means go back to slide 9, I think. It's basically the content of 9. So what's in the revised proposed budget is that 12.5% fare increase that we talked about that was referenced, as well as the weekends could be up to a 25%. Weekends and late night could be up to 25%. And then, as was mentioned, no change to bus. I believe this includes a $20 million of Metro rail service reductions, which has not been explicitly specified, but it would be, I think, sort of what's indicated on the slide a little bit. Shorter peak service could be more 6-car trains. There's a couple other components the board is yet to fully flesh out, but and then again, continuing the improvements on the fare gates and collecting additional revenue from helping to mitigate fare evasion. So I think that's what that refers to.
Okay. So just a comment. I think I'm in support of this. But I really think Metro needs to look at where its demand is and put the resources there, particularly with headways and things like that. I think going forward, we're going to need to be convinced that this is not only efficient in the large sense, but efficient in delivering service where the demand is and looking really hard at where the demand isn't. So I don't know if that point needs to be stressed more, but one thing I'm going to look at is continued hard look at not just simply maintaining all bus lines, because some bus lines may be underperforming and you're just going to have to get rid of them, or go to an on-demand service late at night rather than running 8-car trains. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I'm not seeing being done or committed to. Now, maybe we've got that under the targeted service and fare optimization. So let me ask staff, do we have enough in there that makes that point as clearly as I think we need to?
I can jump in a little bit on the bus side. We can add a little bit more nuance. I think what's implied on what Mr. Letourneau mentioned on keeping the network the same right now and then beginning that year 1 redesign process is that to do it subsidy neutral means trade-offs will have to be made, and it means there will have to be some changes to service based on low productivity routes and sort of different trade-offs in the system. So I think that process is not has not started publicly. So I think there's a lot of conversations to happen on that, but I think it's going to have to be part of that path forward should the board and the region choose to do that, I think, later this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and David, the staff at WMATA is looking at a whole host of things, including maybe the possibility of some 6-car train. I mean, there's a whole list of things that are going to be looked at moving forward. So,
yeah, and maybe just to jump in on the rail side, Dave.
Yeah,
we are implementing 6-car trains, particularly on the Silver Line, which will bring efficiency. I guess my note of caution to what you're saying is, and this is speaking more as a Virginian, if you look from a strict standpoint of ridership and you want to go entirely needs-based, that's probably less service for Virginia.
Wow.
However, if you look at where we need to grow, I would argue we need to provide that level of service. For instance, right as we were joining, I was just chatting with Supervisor Alcorn about the Silver Line ridership statistics. We're seeing 30 to 40% growth year over year on those stations in the new section of the Silver Line. They're still below where a red line station is going to be in the core, sure. But if you look at where Metro's lost riders, it's the long haul rider that really hasn't come back. The short haul rider is mostly back on the system. And so there's kind of two schools of thought here. You could start cutting and reducing service to sort of adjust to demands, and you will see some cost savings there, but you're likely to only further the ridership dip that you're seeing among that section of riders. Or you can really try to win them back. And given the fact that we're still a little bit uncertain as to exactly where we land on the back to office policies in different agencies and different private companies, where Metro is still kind of operating in a a philosophy of let's try to win those riders back and let's keep service at a good level in order to do that, because we are seeing results. So that's just kind of the a little bit of the equation there to think about.
Yeah, and not only the red line, David, but also we have little mini orange crushes going on at times of the day in the blue and orange line through Arlington. So they're trying to do the best they can to balance out. And then the green line too has had several green and parts of the yellow.
Okay. So I think the phrase targeted service and fare optimization has the content I was looking for.
Yeah.
And the discussion is very useful. So I think that's my major question. The rest of it's pretty consistent. I just want to make sure that and I know it is, but I just want to make sure that the pressure stays on to run an efficient system.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Schneider. Appreciate the conversation. Matt and Paul, thank you for filling in some of those blanks. Any other questions? Mr.
Sure.
De Ferrante, I see you have unmuted. Did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Just briefly, I think, so slide 6 talks about this as being the 25 budget and then the CIP, and I didn't see CIP comments in the slide deck. And so, I'm guessing that you have those in the draft letter, and I think process-wise, you might send a draft of the letter sometime tomorrow or Monday, and we could only send comments to you as chair, or, we can't have a meeting, but we could still, but I just think the CIP presents an opportunity, I think, if we talk about it, to have a sentence in there that reminds people of the need to fix this long term, which seems worth it to me. So I don't know if that's the case or not. And then, I have one other couple of comment, but succinct, so we get out of here before 8.
Thank you, Mr. De Ferrante. And Andrew, what's your could there be a sentence on
Absolutely.
CIP?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the intent behind that bullet point. But I think broadly speaking, we intend to convey support for the CIP and the focus on state of good repair, and then really get a couple of points across that you mentioned, Mr. De Ferrante. So one, that the exhaustion point for the dedicated capital funding borrowing capacity is, I think, fiscal 29 or earlier. We do feel impacts to that now, so we do have a funding constraint even in this 6-year CIP on the capital program. And then linking, as is on that slide, the PM Flex, just sort of that reminder we can't do it forever, because those two things are linked, and then we do need to come up with that long-term solution. So we can definitely add the appropriate context and sentences to make sure that is conveyed.
That sounds great. I wonder if there's been a couple of letters in the last couple of days. I wonder if, if it doesn't have to track exactly any letter, but certainly aligning with the content to the extent we agree with content that talks about the inefficiency of massive investments from capital, or significant investments from the capital fund to address operating. Aligning that might be useful. And then my other thoughts are just a big thank you. It's wonderful to hear of 3 meetings and extended in-depth conversation and the level of preparation. For conversation, but probably not for the letter, it seems as though Metro has made some strong efforts on the wage freezing that, is worth, I would think is worth all your skill, Matt and Paul, as you have conversations. I don't think it's a state secret, but I also don't think we should put it in the letter. And then, I know that there's also, so that wage thought seems to be relevant. And then the study also seems to be getting some traction. So, those are things that I'm sure you are aware of. And just, I thought it was okay to say those two thoughts out loud, but to mostly couch it in thanking you guys for all the work. And hoping that we're playing checkers and not chess on the political front, if that makes sense.
If I could just maybe
Please.
address the wage comment. So the revised budget is proposing no wage increase this year. And that is because the representative employees received a 21% increase over the last 3 years. I do think that will be a subject of discussion and negotiation. And I do think it would be appropriate if MVTC chose to comment in some way on the shared nature of sacrifice that everyone involved would have to make here, from riders to to governments that are going to have to raise taxes in some cases to pay for this, but also include workers in that if that's the will of the commission. Because those messages, quite frankly, are a little bit mixed around the jurisdiction and with elected officials. So I think that if that's the will here, and I'm wearing both hats a little bit, but that would be an appropriate comment to add in that would reflect that discussion.
Yeah, I didn't have that phrase, but I'm all for that phrase, right? Because we're all, but I mean, the tectonics there are tight, and so at least from my perspective, being pro labor and shared sacrifice they can coexist. So
Yes. I mean, I think, Matt, the important piece is that everyone agrees that regardless of where they stand, even when we've met with the most pro legislators, they all agree that everyone has to come to the table in good faith. This is a shared sacrifice. This is not just the jurisdictions bailing everyone out again. All the WMATA employees are taking, the non-rep employees are already know they're going to get zero. And they didn't get much the prior 2 years either. So, or 3 years where, as Matt said, the represented people, even during COVID, were getting, very, very healthy raises. So everyone agrees that there does have to be, some shared sacrifice, and everyone has to come to the table in good faith.
Yeah, that great points. Thank you, Matt, for getting that discussion going. And I don't think this belongs in the letter, but one other point, and this came up when Randy Clark was at NVTC last year. One of the things that struck me was during the pandemic, the worst pandemic year, many of us at the local level, we froze employee salaries for that year. And so that was kind of the year that our employees took that hit. And I'm not saying that it's a 1-for-1, but there is, I think, shared sacrifice, I think is the right theme, and being appreciative of that sacrifice, but also understanding the other sacrifice. And this has not been brought up yet. It's one of the elephants in the room, I think, for us local officials. And that is the strain that our local budgets are on this year. We are not exactly in a flush real estate market for the most part in our region, and that is putting pressure on the revenue side for those of us at the local level. And Matt, I know we're all dealing with that. And again, part of the shared sacrifice, but let's go into that with our eyes open.
I wonder, I think this is the danger of group edit. We can't group edit because of appropriate open meetings, but also you guys will have, someone will have thought through the question of, I don't know every proposed advertised rate in the region, but those are sticky numbers when there's 4 cents like you guys are doing, and or at least I think you're doing, and we did 2.5, at least maybe Andrew and Kate and you, Walter, can think about, that's not enough, but the readers of this letter should I hope the key readers would know that those are facts, because if we were holding steady or dropping rates, and I don't know where Loudon is, and so I don't want to oversay, but at least somebody I hope thinks through that as related to your comment.
Thank you. Matt, did you want to add anything? Or?
No, I think if there is some consensus on that phrase might be the one that I would suggest, but
Very good. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments on what NVTC's comments should be on the WMATA budget, this slide or the next slide? Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, very good. Well then, thank you all very much. Let's move on. There is the process issue that we need to now talk about. This is a scheduling situation. Typically we don't do this at a committee level, but we do have an action item relating to the budget comment letter. So again, on the administrative front, this committee's discussion and the things that were just discussed really will serve as the basis for staff to draft a letter to WMATA. And once staff has prepared the draft letter, they're going to send it to me for a quick review and then share it with the rest of the committee. As noted, this will not be a meeting, but it will be an opportunity for feedback to go back to staff on the letter from individual committee members by COB Monday, March 4th. Okay, so this is a pretty quick turnaround. So please do share your comments in a timely manner because of that turnaround time. Once its feedback has been addressed, staff will share the final draft of the letter for final review, and then they'll share that with me and then submit the letter by March 5th. And I could just ask staff, I don't think this will be the case, but if there are any comments suggested by commissioners that would not be included, to work with them ahead of time so that we can make sure everything is going in that folks want to get in. I am going to be looking for a motion, and then we can have discussion on this and any questions or clarifications. But could I get a motion to authorize the NVTC WMATA Committee Chair to submit comments on WMATA's proposed FY 2025 budget and CIP?
So moved. Unless I need to, for the record, share, but I'm happy to move that we authorize you as chair to submit comments on the proposed operating budget and the CIP.
Thank you, Matt. Is there a second?
There's Snyder seconds, and I do have a question for staff. Is the intent then to have the full commission ratify the letter after the fact? I think this is just a matter of governance for the future. I mean, I'm certainly comfortable with the chair and the way that we've talked about, including the committee and the final review, but we should make sure that we're following the best governance. So I'm thinking it should be ratified by the commission in the future when we meet next.
Alan, are you planning to talk about that? I see you've unmuted.
Sure. Sorry, slow computer here. We can definitely do that. We didn't have it on the agenda because of the timing this time around. I think when we initially planned the letter, it was going to have enough time to make it to the full commission. The plan right now, as we've up until right now, has been to have the committee send it forward We are going to obviously share it with the full commission as a blue item next Thursday once we get it submitted. So we can do that. I think we're up to the guidance of the committee if you feel that we need to have it ratified either at the March committee or at a future committee meeting. We're open to your guidance on that.
Yeah, Mr. Schneider, let me make a suggestion. Why don't we have the full commission ratify the letter at the upcoming committee meeting? And if there are any changes, if there are any additions, modifications at the full commission meeting, then why don't we ask commission staff or maybe the commission chair to present those verbally to WMATA at one of the public hearings. So it'll be one letter, but then if there's anything new or additional, that could be presented verbally. Would that sound okay, Mr. Schneider?
It is, as long as it's okay with staff.
Okay, yeah,
I hope it will be, but yeah, I just sometimes you get into these time crunches, and I just want the committee and you, Mr. Chair, to be backed up by the full commission. And, there be no misunderstanding about that.
And Mr. Chair, part of it the public hearings are going to be done and the comment period closes. But I think there's very good ways that we have certain folks who can relay these comments and concerns to the board who are sitting on ours. But having the conversation at next Thursday's commission meeting is absolutely, with the ratification, we can absolutely do that.
I was just going to note. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh no, I was just going to say March 5th is the deadline, but I will say, we do get to see all the comments and all the letters, but when a letter from NBTC or the WSTC or some other group like this comes through, I know it gets a lot of attention. So I think it's important to get it in as quickly as possible.
Right.
Yeah, I believe we have completed the public hearings themselves. So I don't think there would be a verbal opportunity at this point. But I think it should be sent in to the board by the deadline on Monday. But I certainly agree that having the full commission ratify it later would be a good step.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just procedurally, all of our meeting materials went out today. So I'll obviously work with the MVTC chair to do a slight modification on the agenda to note the ratification, just as you see, because the meeting materials for next week's meeting have actually already gone out. We can always modify the agenda as necessary.
Absolutely.
Very good. Appreciate everybody's flexibility on that and additional insights and information. Mr. Schneider, does that sound okay to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure that other members of the commission don't feel that, they're being cut out. They're not. We're meeting a deadline. That this reflects, I think, the commission's view as much as we understand it. But if there are some modifications then that the commission wants and votes on them, then we get a sense that there's an additional comment, we can make those too. We can make those to Metro, but it would be irresponsible to miss the deadline to get these fundamental comments in.
Yeah, perhaps maybe since there are no more public hearings, I was thinking verbally we could provide it, but perhaps there could be a subsequent letter, even though it's past the deadline, to bring up any additional points. And obviously, the Metro Board wouldn't have to review that or consider that, but people write letters all the time, and WMATA gets letters all the time. So,
yeah.
But I think my guess is we probably won't be in that situation. But let's keep that option open, Mr. Schneider, for the whole commission if they had additional comments they wanted to make.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion on the motion that's been made and seconded? Any questions? Okay, since we're meeting virtually, we will need to do this as a roll call vote. And hopefully I know who is here virtually. So I'm going to go ahead and call the roll of attendees. Mr. De Ferrante.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Schneider.
Yes.
And the chair also votes aye. That motion passes. All right, so very good. As discussed, this will be the letter once it's finalized and after submitted because of the deadline. It will come to the full commission for final ratification, but then if there are any additional items, those could be communicated subsequently to WMATA. Okay, anything else on that topic? All right, very good. Let's keep going. Number 5, developing funding options for Northern Virginia transit agencies. Okay, here we go. This is, as we all know, one of the most pressing challenges facing WMATA, as well as our local agencies. And it's the need for a long-term, sustainable, and dedicated funding source that builds upon the Commonwealth's and our local jurisdictions' longstanding commitment to transit. NVTC is leading the way when it comes to this topic. We mentioned it in our budget letter, and it was in our 2023 annual report on WMATA, and is the topic of ongoing work by NVTC staff, which was referenced earlier. Thankfully, the region agrees with NVTC, and this topic keeps coming up at so many levels in a way that we haven't seen, well, since the region came together to provide dedicated capital funding back in 2018. So, if you think back to our last meeting of this committee, which was done jointly with the Legislative Committee of NVTC back in October 2023, we discussed long-term sustainable dedicated funding at a high level. Since then, NVTC's WMATA team has continued to diligently work on this topic and is going to give us an update on their work as well as an overview of the pending work by the General Assembly to take up this challenge. So, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you for a brief presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Alcorn. So, what the goals for this presentation are to kind of weave together some of the prior work that we've done at NVTC and of course that Metro has done in helping state the structural funding challenges that have been presented by the pandemic, and then kind of pivot into what we see as the next steps that are emerging from the Virginia General Assembly to help get to that long-term solution for both Metro as well as transit agencies in Northern Virginia. So stepping back, I think these graphics should hopefully be quite familiar, but Metro actually has two funding cliffs, one on the operating side that we're coming up with sort of a 2-year stopgap solution, and then we need to have that conversation about a long-term solution. And then, as again was mentioned previously, there is that dedicated capital funding bond exhaustion point that's coming in fiscal 29 or earlier, and we do feel constraints already in the capital program from that, even though that is a future point, and that there needs to be a longer-term solution that addresses capital as well. This is something that when we started the Metro Funding and Reform Working Group at a staff level last year, we started at operating. Sort of fast forward to now, a lot has changed, and we've sort of ended with both capital and operating. And then as you'll see in the subsequent slides, the focus on all transit agencies, because obviously we've heard about the long-term issues that VRE has, even though they do have much longer runway with federal aid. And then as we continue to have these conversations with local transit agencies, I think there's some sort of themes emerging because the same conditions with inflation and costs and other issues, I think, are challenges there as well. So next slide. Just a reminder of what the working group set out to do last year. It did two things at a staff level. One was to develop that menu of revenue options, to provide technical information to commissioners and help set the stage and kind of menu for a potential long-term solution. We covered those with this committee, actually in combination with the Legislative and Policy Committee back in October, and included those revenue estimates. The other piece of the working group effort was the reform, accountability, and oversight components, and those fed into the 2023 annual report recommendations that that the full commission approved and we sent back in December. So these things kind of worked in parallel. It's been a very busy report writing time. And the other piece of the sort of reform accountability piece is that this report that we're working on, finalizing the working group report, will touch on some of the unintended consequences of the 3% cap, is that has been a continual topic since NVTC embarked on the 2020 report on the 3% cap, and any considerations as we think about what a longer term structure could look like. Next slide. One thing that emerged through the working group and has especially, I think, been something that we've worked on and helped to explain as these conversations have continued, is how Virginia uniquely participates in Metro, but also has its own local services. This is something that really helped inform the all transit modes component of how we're looking at potential funding solutions. But as you can see very quickly, I think this is hopefully familiar to everyone, but Virginia, at least if you look at platform hours, has about 21% of service. I think it's obviously a different share for DC and Maryland. And then we have more local transit, more local bus services in Virginia than we do Metro bus service. And that's just the nature of who provides what service. And so this is our sort of illustrative to help kind of set that stage. And then a slightly similar picture for paratransit, where Maryland actually has the most Metro access trips. Virginia has the least, and we also have supplemental paratransit services that our local governments provide, or in some place replacement. So that's not something that is done by our peers across the river. We just want to help set this stage about why we're coming up with certain approaches and structures and goals about looking at all transit agencies in Northern Virginia to develop a solution. Next slide. So again, I think that's this, you're going to hear me say that a lot, because it's the journey that we went on last year is to look at the holistic big picture for those agencies. So next slide. Just a reminder, these are the 10 revenue sources that the working group looked at. They looked at them and we generated revenue estimates at an MVTC district level. The 3 that are asterisked, we are generating some snapshots for what those would yield at a statewide level. Something we heard very strongly at that October meeting was to provide additional statewide estimates. So that's something that we're looking into as we speak, and hope to include in a final report in the coming months. Next slide. One piece that was covered in our 2023 annual report recommendations, but we've kind of illustrated a little bit more here, and this was an outgrowth of what we heard at the working group, is a recommended revenue structure. So there's sort of 3 goals here that we are attempting to achieve with said structure. The first is, again, looking at all transit agencies based on the prior information, creating a model that recognizes the unique way that our local services and Metro sort of exist and provide service in the NVTC district, and then really being able to provide that long-term solution from Virginia for Metro is kind of the 3 big goals. And so a couple things that we heard very strongly from the working group, or whatever sort of new revenues are looked at, we should not redirect anything from any existing agencies. That was felt pretty strongly. And again, support all operators in the district, the NVTC district. I think largely and more broadly speaking, any new revenues that are generated should come on top of our existing structure. And that's really to maintain the existing state and local commitments that we have, maintain sort of the way the trust fund works with the gas tax and state aid, and then align something new on top of that, more sort of broadly speaking. And so the basic idea here is to direct revenues to NVTC, hold them in trust, and then we would come up with some form of allocation framework that helps meet those numerous objectives. Next slide. So trying to step back, the body of work that's been done here started with that value of transit report that I think Mr. Smedberg mentioned, and then sort of those paired reports that I've been mentioning, the 2023 annual report recommendations, Metro Funding Working Group technical report that we're hoping to finish up in the coming months. And then as we look forward, those are all inputs, is the way we look at it, into this broader SJ28 long-term study that's coming out of the Virginia General Assembly. And so that I'll touch on in later slides, but I think that's really the vehicle to help generate the long-term solution. And so broadly speaking, for that timeline, it would, assuming it passes the Virginia General Assembly, because there's a lot of parts right now, that would, I think, be very engaging this year with sort of meetings and reports by the end of this year, and then at an interim level, and then again at the end of calendar 25. We anticipate a lot of engagement, as we mentioned earlier. Next slide. So the study was actually introduced by Commissioner Evans, Senator Evans. It continues to move forward. I think this update is as of noon today, so it's really been changing and moving this week. But right now, what it does is it establishes a joint Senate and House subcommittee to look at long-term sustainable dedicated operating and capital funding for all transit agencies in the NVTC and the PRTC. And then it looks at cost containment control strategies for just Metro. And then again, I mentioned those dates. So this, I think, will be a significant year for that effort. Next slide. There's sort of two committees or groups, the way the bill that's included in the bill. NVTC is represented, so I think that's sort of the main point here we want to highlight. But as far as the joint subcommittee, what came out today was 3 members from the Senate, 4 members from the House, member who's from the Metro Board of Directors from Virginia, member of MVTC, MVTC's executive director, and then the Secretary of Transportation. And then there's a technical working group with is what the organizations on the right that really encompass a whole gamut of transit related aspects in Northern Virginia. I think no matter what comes out of this bill, we anticipate a lot of engagement at both staff and an elected level with the commission, the committee, et cetera, just to help shepherd our aspect of this study through. Next slide. And then again, trying to link these to the goals, the way we see it here is, our annual report recommendations, the funding working group, the 10 revenue sources we looked at, that's all an input. And the bill calls to look at those 10, sort of validate the work, extend it to PRTC as well, and then look at an additional 5 new revenue sources. The group may offer recommendations to the 2026 General Assembly. And again, just a reminder of those goals, which are all transit agencies to come up with that long-term solution and look at the cost containment tools to ensure the long-term fiscal sustainability of Metro.
Perfect. Andrew, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, we're
done.
Yeah.
I think where I kind of wanted to end
All
up
right.
was to say that we're really excited that sort of the body of work that this commission has worked on is gonna I think help set the stage for this, and that there's a lot of movement to come up with that long-term solution, and that we anticipate a lot of hard work this calendar year, next calendar year to get there. So happy to turn it back to the chair, and or if Kate or however, whatever order of operations we want to go.
Andrew, great presentation. Paul, go right ahead.
No, I just wanted to make one comment. The technical group that's there has the NVTA on it. Just want to make sure that everyone understands in all the discussions. And when I talked to Adam originally about this and other, it's focused on transit and not roads and road projects. It's really a transit focus. Andrew, what's going on there?
There's a cat.
So anyway, just wanted to put that little finer point on things. I know why NVTA is there, but
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. Excellent point. We have seen mission creep in other situations before.
Yes,
so.
So.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Andrew, thank you again for pulling this all together as an excellent summary. And Mr. Smedberg, I do want to say I was very pleased to hear some of the responses you've been getting in Richmond. People are very quickly jumping to the need for a longer term solution for excellent reasons, like you mentioned. I don't think any of us want to be in this situation year after year after year.
Yeah,
after year.
And that's also coming from key Republicans that we have met with as well. that are thoughtful about this issue as a whole, and they immediately jump to that conclusion that we've just gotta fix this. So
Yeah, and I guess with that in mind, I know this is a study, a group that's planned to go for a 2-year period, but I would hope that there would be some real opportunities after the first year, to move forward with at least pieces of a longer term solution, for some of the same reasons, Mr. Smedberg, you just mentioned. I don't know if everybody agrees what the long-term solution would be, but I think everyone agrees there needs to be a long-term solution. So
yeah, whether it's one regional type solution, and I think, Maryland, just so everyone is aware, I think Matt or I may have mentioned this along the way over the last several months. Maryland already has a Blue Ribbon Commission established that is already looking at this. They've been meeting now they've got other serious challenges. Their trust fund is bankrupt. They've got major issues in Maryland right now. But one of the main focuses of that group is to look at a long-term funding stream. And they're months ahead of us already. And the district, is more than happy to join in on the conversation. I don't know ultimately what they end up doing, if they establish something formally or if they just, talk amongst themselves and come up with something with the mayor. But, there's definitely consensus within that group as well that, we need to do something. And whether it's something the region can actually agree to, or if it's something where we have 3 different things that contribute to a pot, whatever it is, I think people are, sort of open. So.
Thank you very much, Paul, for sharing that. Other questions, comments, Matt?
Thank
Parente, sorry.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess would be the speaker and the majority leader who would appoint the members of the General Assembly, or does the bill specify? I think first, big thank you for the ongoing work. This looks great. I don't know the timeline. Amy might, as to whether by next Thursday, the 7th, bill will have passed, or this will have finally passed. But big thank you for all the ongoing work that probably Andrew and Kate and everybody, I would guess Paul and Matt, and
Yeah, for what it's worth, the response has been extremely positive. So,
yeah.
They understand that this is going to take time, obviously.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I could answer some of those procedural questions. Indeed, the draft has been changing even between yesterday and today, but it does appear to be that the Senate positions are appointed by the Committee on Rules, and the House ones would be appointed by the Speaker of the House. So it's a little bit different in the way it's being handled between the Senate and the House. And obviously the members of from the WMATA Board of Directors and NVTC, that is something in which this body will be deciding. So that's how that's set up right now. In terms of timeline, again, that's something that's changed. At least the products have changed, but there's specifically 2 dates that are referenced in the bill. One is to have meetings completed by November 30th of this year, and then also having meetings completed by the end of November 30th of next year. There's not specifics. There's mentions of executive summaries and findings being available no later than the first day of the regular session of the General Assembly on each of those years. So lots of meetings till November, a product being developed in December, being presented at each of the new General Assembly sessions. So the other thing that of note in the latest version is that this no longer has any funding for consultants to provide this work. It is currently, we've been talking a little bit back and forth. This current version anticipates that staff in legislative services or other legislative staff would be leading this effort for the benefit of all. This is not an insignificant amount of people to meet and information to be shared. I think a positive thing, and I think Andrew somewhat alluded to it, a lot of the products and analysis that they wish to have considered are things that we and or all of our transit systems have done. So a lot of this will be not, most of this work will not be original, but it's going to be synthesizing and bringing up. Just to point out, when it comes to our regional transit providers, all of them have done transit strategic plans that have identified their long-term needs. We happen to be already amassing those into a regional document through our regional bus analysis. So some of these things are going to be very informative towards the other conversation. So, I do believe we have a great deal of interest in making sure this is appropriately resourced to be successful. Not having any additional support beyond General Assembly staff is something that we're a little nervous about. I'll be honest. This is a big effort.
Sure. Well, that's
this way. There was some talk originally, Mr. Chair, about JLARC doing something, but JLARC is so backed up right now. It's going to be a challenge potentially, but maybe it's something the jurisdictions could even help out with. But one thing that Kate said that reminded me in our last meeting with the governor, by the end of this year, I think they're going to want to see some things coming forward pretty quickly that start this train, if you will, is out of the gate and really heading down some sort of path. And there is some general direction. So I think once this does pass, I think they're going to appoint these people pretty and get this thing started.
And Mr. Chair, if I could,
Please.
going back to what originally Adam talked about, because of the anticipation and activity associated with this report, we do see this as being thematically a big part of the WMATA Committee and joint and legislative committee moving forward. So as we look to do these meetings, just again, staff just kind of absorbing, we anticipate a fair number of those to be joint with our legislative WMATA Committee and the WMATA Committee report this later year. I think probably a lot of the work associated with that will be done, especially to be complementary of anything unique that NVTC does in this space.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schneider, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, just a question. So what's the total length of this study? Is it a 2-year study ending November 30, 2025? In other words, what's the deadline? So it's a 2-year, well, I don't know, whatever you call it. It seems to be a longer study than was originally envisioned when the JLARC study was being thought of.
Yeah, what's been drafted right now appears to be I'm going to almost say 2 waves. A study for this calendar year that would be ready for the next General Assembly session, and then study during 25 that would be informing the 26. And that's how it's currently written, with products in prior to both of those sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to want something, okay, here's our recommendation, in the next year and 3 quarters or 2 years for sure. I mean, that's people are, I mean, we have to take advantage of this opportunity that is before us now.
No, I agree with that.
Like I said in these meetings, David, everyone is skipping right to the comment, we've got to come up with a long-term solution.
Right. And in fact, that's exactly where I was going. But are we creating a study now that we're assured that it will be 2026 before there's any action for the General Assembly? And how does that fit into the Metro's needs?
I'll jump in on that one. I think there's an opportunity for at least some solutions to happen sooner in next year's General Assembly session. I think that's why it's set up as a 2-year process. These things do take a while. 5-6 years ago, as you know very well, I believe that was 15, 18 months, something like that, to pull all that together. So it is likely to take 2 years, but there is an opportunity to do at least a bunch of it, if not the lion's share in the first year, if the stars align. I would just say that.
Okay. And one other question. I like it, and I like obviously the Northern Virginia focus, but do we run a risk that the study will just be dismissed as there's Northern Virginia again? How about the rest of the state? Let me ask that one.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could, because I've actually had active conversations with other transportation folks around the state, specifically about this study. I think the general consensus is a lot of the other regions of the state are not as complicated as ours, so they're actually doing this type of study internally, so that when there is a conversation about a transportation package or a public transit package statewide, everybody's going to be ready. We anticipate we'll probably be working very closely with the Virginia Transit Association, just like we did 5 years ago and 4 years ago for the consolidated. But there are folks who are sort of jealous of this going on, and I definitely appreciate that. We have a much more complicated world of 6 different transits, 7 different transit systems. Other regions have one, and so they can do this internally, right? So
Okay, so you actually see then we do this study, and then you actually see other parts of the Commonwealth doing their own studies, and it's highly likely that these are gonna come together at some point with the ultimate legislative approach. Okay, that helps explain the system. I know how effective the schools were, and I don't know if it's finally cleared the General Assembly, but they certainly got a lot of momentum to get the 1% sales tax option for school construction. And the leaders of that were the rural school districts. So I'm very attuned to actually getting this done and what the role is of this study in the larger effort to make sure, which will probably be required, that other parts of the state get some benefits as well.
Very good.
Thanks. I like the
Yeah.
study. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I think you've been watching Richmond for a while. That's all I'll say.
Mr. Chair, so
Yes, please.
your comments
Mr.
and
DeFrantis.
Dave's both lead me to just be interested in making explicit what I'm confident that we are already aware of, already on, which is the Speaker and the Rules Committee. They need to be ready to choose wisely the bipartisan nature of the folks who are on the group with respect to those, what is it, 7 slots? So particularly if we want to try and get something done next year, we don't have the right across the state people, for those 3 or 4 slots that we may need bipartisan support. Hope you can tolerate me sharing that thought. We should be on that, and you're probably already on that early, because if you get ahead of it, we can get the right people, and then we have a chance, I think.
Thank you, Mr. DeFronte. One of the things that I think is still not clear, because the bill's not finished, and we don't know what other parts of the state are going to do study-wise, is how much is this independent compared with the other studies that are going to be going underway, and how much will this actually incorporate some of those folks directly? I'm not clear on sort of how that's going to fall down. I don't know if anybody else is, but you're right. We've got to make sure we're setting this up to be successful.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, if I could, the scope of this study being conducted at a legislative level is somewhat almost unique. The other jurisdictions, as I said, they are doing their internal work on this space. This just happens to be amassing it in. We did actually have a similar model of this back part of the dedicated funding that did focus 100% on the WMATA problem, actually. And so there's a precedent for doing a regionally focused study and still having it come together with other parts of the state. We have not heard any interest or concern to continuing adding onto the scope of this. The scope of this actually is very big. So the sense that I've had in conversations with folks down in Richmond is this is an important scope. And let's not, we'll make sure there's the right people obviously around the table, but that there's not been any pressure to change the geographic scope of this, but rather focus on the unique needs of Northern Virginia. As I said, going back, but those around the state are looking, saying, hey, maybe we want to do a similar scope for our region. And use that, not necessarily having go through the legislature.
Yeah, everyone we've talked to, Walter or Matt, is, this has really been Northern Virginia focused. I mean, everyone gets that. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is trying to manage the priorities we have within Northern Virginia, and everyone's, going to want a piece of the pie, which, maybe it goes into a general, whatever, but that I think is going to be even more of a challenge than worrying about what's going to happen with the rest of the state. So.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Kate. Good questions.
Jurisdictions will have plenty of money to spend on the school's capital budgets.
Well, and I think that relates to something I think that makes this so important is we really don't want Metro competing with school funding every year.
Yeah,
competing with fire and police, and I mean that's not set up for success long term.
Not at all, right? And that's where it's heading in some ways. I mean, and you're dealing with now collective bargaining agreements and everything else adding to your budgets. I mean, it's a whole new dynamic out there for sure.
That is true.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions or comments on SJ 28? Anything else? All right, very good. Well, I want to thank the NVTC staff, Andrew, Kate, all of you done a great job pulling all this together. Appreciate your support. I am a little concerned, maybe like you, maybe in a different way, that there wasn't consultant funding put on here, because I think you're going to end up carrying most of the load, I'm afraid, on a lot of the work for this, but we really, really appreciate that you're doing. Any last comments on any other issue or this issue from any committee members? Okay, if there's no other business, then we're going to finish before 7:30, not just 8 o'clock. All right, well, then I will call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.